And now I'm here with H.A. Goodman, an amazing journalist, political commentator, and author who has followed this story of WikiLeaks for a number of years now. H.A., what do you think about the current situation with Julian Assange?
Well, thank you so much again for having me, Elizabeth. And it's just an honor to be here, as always, with you and Susie and everybody. I think that it's obviously horrendous that he deserves his freedom. He should have been free already. Was 2012 he went into the embassy?
It was, yes.
So 2012, and he deserves his freedom. He did nothing wrong but publish what the Washington Post once published in the Pentagon Papers. And and he's not a U.S. citizen, which makes it very odd that the United States would be after him. But I think also it's horrendous in that people who should be supporting, and I won't get too specific, people who should be supporting Julian Assange are not. And I think we've all made, well, I have for sure, but I think we've all made a mental note. Who's supporting Julian Assange? Who's not supporting Julian Assange? Who wants him to be free? Who doesn't want him to be free? Who is threatened by what he publishes and who isn't threatened? Like if the DNC or the WikiLeaks DNC or Podesta emails were about Bernie Sanders or about Trump cheating somebody, then I wouldn't have voted for Bernie. I wouldn't vote for Trump. I'd be like, oh my God, I need to reevaluate what's happening. You know, this is exposing corruption. If I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, well, I'm gonna try to change things. I don't attack the messenger.
Exactly.
And I mean, without WikiLeaks, the whole concept of like the quote unquote fake news, it's not the actual reporting. Like if an event took place, it took place. It's the propaganda and the spin regarding that event. So the publication of the DNC and the Podesta emails took place. The fake news is that it was a plot by Trump, WikiLeaks, and Russia to inform us that Bernie Sanders was cheated. Therefore, giving Clinton the popular vote, but also having her lose Wisconsin. It's like so stupid. Like you have to be really a stupid idiot to actually believe that took place. It's like, I don't want to even say childish. It's sophomoric. It's this absurd. It doesn't make any sense, but people then just go ahead and even the intelligence reports, if you just read the intelligence reports, the ODNI report is written like a high schooler wrote it, like just joking around. Like if you said I make a funny, write this funny report, it's like a high schooler wrote it. And they're like, I'm not really sure about it, but I'm highly confident. I'm either highly confident or moderately confident. And there's warranty disclaimers. And the ODNI, the DHS report has a hilarious warranty disclaimer because they don't want to get sued. So they're like, this is not fact. And this is an ongoing thing. And so the intelligence reports are not certain. The DNC never gave its servers to the FBI or anyone. Even James Comey, who's like a slithering reptile, he's like, oh, well, we asked and they said no. So they never got the service, but then the ultimate conflict of interest, which is like insane. You wouldn't have Trump strike if the RNC was allegedly hacked. So they're like, oh, let's go ahead and outsource a firm. So the DNC outsourced a firm to then corroborate what it said. BuzzFeed is suing the DNC, which I find to be like the ultimate karma. And then Fusion GPS is getting sued. Christopher Steele is getting sued. Everybody knows now about Strzok and Page. I mean, it's like no good. Like no good is done. Like it's like a deal with the devil where you don't even get anything in return. You just get hurt.
Well, I think that's one of the really interesting things is that you can compare that uncertainty and that lack of tangible evidence in all of the stuff you just mentioned with the primary source material that WikiLeaks publishes and the amount, the degree to which that is just straight up, hard truth. It is what it is. It's evidence. And that is exactly what you're talking about being absent. in all the documents that you're discussing. I also think it's interesting that you bring up the fact that, all of these stories that we're not hearing, but what we did hear in the last couple of weeks, and we had a special kind of emergency event about, was the fact that there was this news that came out that, Julian Assange may be handed over imminently. And I was wondering if I could kind of get your thoughts on that, and the fact that that hasn't happened yet. What are your thoughts about like moving forward? Do you think this kind of hype is going to continue where we have an emergency and then nothing happens, or what do you see happening?
I think it's absolutely horrendous that he's in this position. I think that, not to get political, I think it's fueled from the pure hatred from the Democratic National Committee. Because if you notice, even like these people, it's not a coincidence that they're duplicitous. It's just like who they are. So Mike Pompeo tweeted WikiLeaks emails. Then he's like, oh, we have to get tough on WikiLeaks. But he tweeted WikiLeaks emails. But then he's playing ball, and he was CIA, and then he has to play ball. But he tweeted, and then Trump said like 100 times, I love WikiLeaks. So like Trump, the human being, probably is like, yeah, WikiLeaks is great. The thing is, the rebuttal to that is, well, his emails weren't hacked. Yeah, but he didn't cheat Bernie Sanders. That's actually what took place. So the problem is you have a situation where knowledge was presented to the American public of a horrible crime. It's a fraud, the DNC fraud lawsuit that Jared and Elizabeth Beck and Nico House. This is a crime that took place. So now Julian Assange and WikiLeaks informed us of an actual crime. It's not a crime that Russia, and if the propaganda is correct, which it's not, it's bogus, but it's not a crime that Russia would inform us that a crime was taking place. So I think it's horrible what's happening. I think it's not a coincidence, because when Pence went to Ecuador, you had how many Democratic senators sign a letter saying you better, twist the screws and make it tough on him. You better make it tough on him. It wasn't Republican senators, it was Democrat senators. So I think that ultimately I might be too optimistic. I've always stated I believe that Julian Assange will prevail, and I do believe that he will be free. I think that there's too much on his side in terms of momentum, in terms of positive legal favorable rulings. So legally, he's in terms of asylum, he actually fits every definition of a political, refugee or seeking asylum, or a political prisoner seeking asylum. But then there's the issue of WikiLeaks being a media organization. The UK ruled that. Then there's the issue of WikiLeaks emails being admissible in a court case in the UK. Then there's the United Nations saying that he's owed compensation. Then there's the issue of destruction of evidence. You had the British prosecutors destroyed evidence. And Sweden wanted to drop its case years prior.
In 2013.
Yeah.
In 2013.
The thing is, there's too much evidence, even for people who don't like Assange. At the end of the day, there's going to be some level of self-preservation, because there's a whole lot of media organizations in the UK that also the precedent of hurting Assange could hurt them. So I think that there's too much going for Julian Assange's legal team. I think there's too much momentum, because there is the issue of the EU, and there are issues that Europe is supposed to be more, less, brutal or barbarian. There's a notion that Europe is supposed to be more for human rights than the US. I don't see how the UK could justify extraditing Julian Assange when he's had all of these legal victories, and probably he'll have a lot more legal victories if heaven forbid he's arrested by the UK. So if he's arrested by the UK, it actually hurts the UK. I don't really understand why this push for the UK to want to have custody of Assange, because then they're liable, and then they have to prove a case. See, now they're just like sitting back like, oh, you skipped bail, we're going to get you. But now if they take hold of him, they're going to have to explain, well, what is it this guy did wrong?
I think the fear for a lot of people is that they're going to like immediately bundle him off to the US, like without even due process of any kind. But I also think, as we were discussing a little bit before we went on air, the fact is that it seems that there is a lot of fear from someone in the establishment generally, of Julian Assange being, losing his asylum, from being expelled from the embassy, because as we were saying, right now he's cut off. But if he comes out of the embassy, he could potentially prove that there was no Russian hack and this is really important, it's critically important, without revealing their source of the DNC and Podesta emails, because WikiLeaks would never ever save themselves by burning a source ever. But the fact that he could do that, he could talk about the real origin of those without talking about the source itself, or prove that it wasn't a hack anyway, I think has somebody very scared. And I don't know if you had any comment on some of the attacks against WikiLeaks in the last few days that seem to have really reached a hysterical pitch, as we've also been hearing that he may be expelled from the embassy. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is the thing. The second I saw, there was one journalist who tried to claim that Assange was anti-Semitic. The second I saw that, I was like, I'm Jewish, and this is ridiculous. And, first of all, the DNC, in the DNC emails, they used Bernie Sanders' Jewish faith against him. It's like the most ridiculous. It's so overt. And then I said that it's so stupid, too. It's not like Assange is not DMing people. There's WikiLeaks says other people. It's more than just one person. If I get a signed, letter from the White House, it's not like Trump taking a moment. Really? Oh my goodness. Here, HA, I'm spending an hour doing this for you. So it's like, obviously, it's not Julian Assange. And the thing, this morally bankrupt intellectual basis for calling somebody anti-Semitic or racist or nationalist supremacist enabler, all of these ridiculous euphemisms, and just, it's so easy now to try to just discard somebody, whatever they do, as, oh my God, this is alt-right or whatever. The reality is there's nothing that he has said ever that's nothing that he's done, certainly nothing that he said racist or anti-Semitic. And it's just a last, like you said, I think it's a last-ditch attempt. I think that they don't want the truth out. And like you said, they probably do fear Julian Assange in UK custody.
Absolutely. And I think that in addition to that, Caitlin Johnstone, the amazing independent journalist who kind of kicked off this vigil, pointed out in one of her recent pieces that a lot of those DMs, that like the really, the ones that people that are making sort of a drama about, were previously published by The Intercept. And so this is basically old news that's being recycled. And the fact that they're doing that indicates to me that they're desperate and they're trying to, recycle that narrative for whatever effect. So they have to be afraid of something. And it's also interesting, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that we know, it was most likely not Assange writing those messages. We actually do know from the dates that they were written that Assange couldn't have written a lot of them because he was cut off. Like they literally, when The Intercept published it, they really shot themselves in the foot, that their own argument was completely invalid. Anyway, with that aside, I think that just the fact that narrative has been pushed again, as we say, I think it really indicates some level of fear. So it's really contradictory because, it seems like the US really wants Assange out of the embassy. It seems like the UK wants him out of the embassy, but at the same time, they're kind of terrified of him coming out of the embassy. So it's definitely confusing. It's definitely been a busy couple of weeks in terms of what's going on with Assange and WikiLeaks and the developments around his asylum. I wanted to know, though, I know that we've discussed this a lot in some of your previous, segments with this vigil, but what was it that initially drew you to WikiLeaks and sort of discussing the content? Was it the DNC emails and the corruption in Bernie Sanders and around Bernie Sanders and the Democratic primary, or was it earlier than that?
Well, I think the Iraq war logs was the initial thing, and I know that the reality of the Iraq war and the war in Afghanistan that was not discussed by the media here. And then there was the collateral damage video. But I just always found it. I mean, I think that WikiLeaks had already made a name for itself, long before the DNC and Podesta emails. So we had already seen, like, I do remember there was one email or what was it? Chelsea, I think it was either from Chelsea Manning, the cable that talked about Hillary Clinton saying that Saudi Arabia funds terror. So, but then she took money to the Clinton Foundation, no problem. So then, I mean, it's really simple when when people are in power and they're admitting things and they're doing so in private. It's then very easy to say, hey, wait a second, well, why did this happen? And I do think also, like, from my vantage point, I want all the American soldiers abroad to be brought home. And I think that the publications prior to the DNC and Podesta emails make the case. We have this really horrendous, it's ongoing, these horrendous wars where people don't know the reality of what's taking place.
In fact, just about a week, in the last few days, we saw a massive strike on Yemen that just destroyed, a number of people's lives there, and that's been going for so long. It's been since the Obama administration that we've been aiding Saudi Arabia in bombing Yemen so badly. So, yeah, there are so many conflicts like that we don't hear anything about. Yet, when anything happens in Syria or any other country that the deep state wants to invade, we get to hear every single little thing that happens, whether it's real, whether it's stage, we don't know, etc. So the duplicity in the way that we're presented these narratives is incredible, and that again is why WikiLeaks is so important in kind of revealing the way those narratives are put together, how we're given them, and how they differ so much from reality. But so great point.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely.
So as far as the value, I know, and I've discussed this with you before, but for those who haven't listened to your previous discussions with us on this vigil, obviously the impact of the DNC and Podesta emails was huge. I know that, I first watched your show when you were covering Bernie Sanders and the corruption in the Democratic primary. But are there any other ways in which the WikiLeaks publications have really impacted your work and strengthened your reporting that you can kind of share with our audience?
Well, I think that it's just, I think that WikiLeaks gives people a framework for the most truthful aspects of international relations, domestic politics. So all you have to do is actually read the words of Clinton's campaign to realize that they exalted and pushed Trump to win. They pushed then candidate, future President Trump. It was a Pied Piper strategy. They weren't smart, but they thought they were geniuses. And they said, well, let's go ahead and elevate Trump. So they did this to themselves. They did this all to themselves. And then you just realize that from the fraud side, the Democratic National Committee committed a tremendous fraud. You cannot have a primary where you tell people that everyone's equal and that there's no bias and there's no everyone, you know what, if Bernie wins, fine. The thing also with Bernie Sanders is that it also, his cheating also changed his former movements. So he was talking about breaking up too big to fail banks, reinstating Glass-Steagall, ending regime changes. Nobody's talking about that now.
Unfortunately, very true. Yes.
It's just all it is single payer and then a couple things that are maybe associated with that, but no breaking up banks. Even Elizabeth Warren's not talking about breaking up banks or reinstating Glass-Steagall. Certainly not banning fracking or anything like that. So there was a far more robust movement that he had. It wasn't just single payer was one thing. That's just one thing. And there were a lot of things that also reached out to conservatives too. That's why Bernie Sanders, there were a lot of conservatives who eventually voted for Trump, or a lot of progressives who eventually voted for Trump, who loved Bernie, then people were like, well, how could you even think? Well, I mean, before we knew what took place, Bernie was different, that movement was different. And then we realized, well, he was cheated. That's just one example. I mean, you can see the duplicity. Well, I gave the example of one of the cables where Clinton says that one country funds terrorists, and then she has no problem taking donations from that. But I mean, there's just I always said that I always believed that WikiLeaks was a very pure. It is a very pure and kind of noble endeavor. It is a noble endeavor, definitely, but it's like this. You're not getting any spin. There is no analysis. There is no propaganda. There's no commentary.
It's so different from everything else we're used to, you know.
It's like now everything's like a gaslighting, propaganda, spin-driven, euphemism-driven. George Orwell called euphemisms verbal refuse. That's like all you hear now. Everything's a euphemism. And you just see it now. Like, it's like, oh, well, Russia, everything's Russia. And Russia wanted you to know that Bernie was cheated. It makes no sense. I think that without Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, like, what do you have? You have the Washington Post. Or you have CNN or the BBC. You have people who are slaves to groupthink and to this paradigm that is completely devoid of any moral foundation, because like there's no value system. It's not like cheating is bad. It's, oh my God, how did you find out that the cheating took place? Oh, it's the Russians. They wanted you to know.
Well, and I think John Pilger you've called them PR firms for the state, or Hillary Clinton. But I mean, I think John Pilger put it really well when he said they're stenographers for the state. And, you know, that they project themselves as these, you know, people that are a check and balance against the power of the state. But it's WikiLeaks has really shown us the depth to which that isn't true. And yeah. But I was going to ask you as well, like, so how, one of the things Kathy Vogan brought up in the last segment that I thought was really kind of interesting was the idea that, you know, in 2100, that we will look back, or the, you know, humanity, if we're still around, will look back at this as the beginning of the digital era, in a similar way, and it will have changed our civilization in a way similar to, well, not civilization, but our culture drastically in a way similar to the printing press. And I was wondering, you know, what do you think we will be looking back and saying about Julian Assange in 100 years from now, you know, hypothetically, given that we survive and we don't, you know, kill ourselves with hydrogen bombs or something?
Yeah, I think that I listened to Kathy Vogan and I agree 100%. And I also stated that Assange will be not only remembered, he'll be studied, and WikiLeaks, mainly Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, will be studied by students hundreds and hundreds of years from now. Because the thing is, like, you know, the truth doesn't have to be so frightening. Just accept it and move on. It's not that big of a deal. Like, just, if you're the Democratic Party, just, okay, you cheated. Now don't do it again. If you're the CIA, okay, now look, we know you could do a couple things. Big deal. Move on. This doesn't affect their budget. It's not like there's this fear. And then we know that Clinton used a server that was in her basement that was unencrypted. The whole planet hacked into it. Everybody knows this. And then there's a New York Times article with Mueller as the FBI director and yellow cake uranium shipped out of the country. We already know all of these things. This is in the New York Times. So it's like, you don't have to look far. I think, like, Noam Chomsky stated that the New York Times and the Washington Post are good, like, publications of record. They'll actually, before the propaganda spin, they'll actually publish enough information to destroy future propaganda spins. So I think Assange will be viewed in a very, very favorable light, because the truth is always, at the end of the day, viewed in a positive light. You know, hundreds of years from now, people are not going to say, oh, the Russians wanted Americans to learn that Bernie was cheated. They're not going to care about that, because they're not disgruntled. They're not a disgruntled, pathetic political party. They're just going to be people who are like, oh wow, this one guy published a whole lot of things that were the absolute truth, written by people in power who are upset that it was that their words were published, and he was persecuted. But I do think that he will be. I think that he will be victorious. I really do. I think the political and legal momentum is on his side.
I think, and I mean, we're only, kind of at the beginning, the dawning still of this century. And I think that what will determine, I said this with Kathy, the way that we treat Assange collectively, what we allow our state and our deep states to do to Assange will be a determinator for how our civilization does develop in a major way. If WikiLeaks, is destroyed, that will negatively affect us massively, and there will be no check and balance on the intelligence agencies and their collecting of our data. And, the way that Assange talks about AI being a really damaging possible development, et cetera, et cetera. But if WikiLeaks flourishes, if Assange is protected, then we have a hope for a transparent, free future that we've never had before the digital age. So I think that there's this massive dividing line. And I think Caitlin actually wrote about similarly a few weeks ago when she said that, we're deciding as humanity whether we'll evolve or whether we'll die. I think it's kind of that way when we look at the situation with Assange on which way we're going to go. So.
And I agree. And also, I'll also state this, the intelligence communities, whatever community, or the intelligence chiefs or whatever, these agencies throughout the world, and especially within the United States, they're actually doing a really counterproductive, stupid thing that is not sustainable. What they're doing, and this is the thing, see, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, their foundation is actually an altruistic foundation. It's not like to hurt. So what they're doing is stupid and not sustainable, and actually will be counterproductive. And they're trying to attack somebody that doesn't really have an evil motive.
Exactly. And I mean, one good example of that is Vault 7. The CIA should be thanking WikiLeaks because they didn't publish the weaponized versions of the malware, et cetera, et cetera. And that was allowing them to know, hey, you're not secure. You're losing really dangerous data, because if that information gets out into the wild without the redaction, which I guess it was, that's incredibly dangerous if nobody knows about it. So anyway, I agree.
And that's the thing. Like, they should. Comey was stupid because I think there was there was almost a time where, Julian Assange could have had some kind of immunity or whatever. And then he, of course, because everything he touches turns horrible, but he stopped that. But see, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, if heaven forbid there's like an evil version, because Julian Assange is noble. There's really there's nothing negative about publishing the truth. If the truth hurts, then don't be corrupt. Don't be evil. Don't do these things that are counterproductive to the citizens of your country, or don't, spy on the French elections, whatever. I mean, there's like a million things that you published that is just the truth. Nobody has ever been hurt by. And people make these stupid claims like, oh, you're putting lives at risk. There's not one person who has been harmed. Not one person. And if there was one person, you'd hear that name forever by the New York Times and the Washington Post and all that. So, but what I think, though, is that they're suppressing. It's not a sustainable endeavor to suppress truth. You could get like this mutation in a really, really dangerous form. So, like, we have a noble, altruistic version of WikiLeaks, and we have Julian Assange, and they're doing things that are good, based on altruism. If you then try to silence Assange and WikiLeaks, well, then what do you think is going to sprout up and pop up? Very likely, I'm not like predicting or foreshadowing, I'm just saying it's just basic logic. An organization that's not altruistic, or a person that's not altruistic. That's obvious. So it actually hurts the intelligence community, or it hurts the governments, or it hurts the people that are trying to, because they're like, oh, we have to silence him. He knows too many secrets. Well, then you're going to get people who are vindictive and hate-filled, and who also, can publish, who have sources and could publish things that really do hurt people. Because what they've done is, when you've turned the truth into a danger, then you're going to get people who have contempt. perhaps it's a natural reaction, obviously, but then you'd have people who it's just not sustainable. So the CIA should just literally just say, okay, you know what? Here, we'll grant you immunity. Tell us what you're doing, what we're doing wrong. The CIA, the FBI, the NSA should go ahead and actually pay Julian Assange and WikiLeaks to help them. I don't know if he would accept, but
I don't think he would at all. But
but I mean, like, I'm not saying help. I'm not saying help them spy. I'm saying what the U.S. government should do is say, look, as best you can, what are some things that we do that are not good for national
It's interesting
security?
you bring that up, because actually, there would be no necessity, and WikiLeaks would probably never in a million years, have a financial relationship with those agencies. But without any connection of that kind, they still reached out to them to say, hey, we have this information. Hey, you need to fix these holes that you have. And so in that sense, as you said earlier, they're very altruistic in that sense.
But the thing is, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, all of these agencies exist. Theoretically, they exist to protect the American people. They exist to protect the American people from terrorism. After 9/11, we were told that at any moment, God forbid, we could be attacked. Well, what vulnerabilities do we have?
Well, and Ray McGovern has said that if WikiLeaks existed before 9/11, it would have been prevented. He said that on the emergency vigil. He said because there were people that knew that something was going to happen, but the information wasn't made available, and so that's why that was the last
exactly
sort of.
Exactly. So, if you could utilize the expertise of Julian Assange to save American lives, why not? Why would you not do so? Maybe because they're still so corrupt.
Yeah, I think that would be about the answer. Is like that they don't care about safety; they care about holding on to power. And that's why my favorite kind of description of that, in addition to the deep state, is the unelected power structure. It's the power structure that doesn't change no matter who is president or what political party. And I think, and I'm sure Susie's mentioned this a number of times in the stream already, but there's a really great quote from Julian Assange that says the attacks against us are a unified front. And I think that applies politically, and it refers to that unelected power structure. And so our response has to be unified. And so I think that kind of, but it goes to what you're saying, and that's in the sense of that being the reason why there won't be that kind of genuine, honest, like, hey, this helps us. Let's check it out for the safety of the Americans that we're supposed to be protecting, etc.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. Like this constant quest to suppress truth, it's not sustainable, and it's counterproductive, and it doesn't. It could lead to so many horrible unintended consequences. And you have a resource in Julian Assange, so why wouldn't you use this resource? There's no, if he's such an enemy of the state because he actually publishes the truth, then maybe we should actually fix things so we're not as corrupt, we don't lie and cheat, we don't engage in such horrendous wars. This way, we won't have 1 million of the 2.5 million soldiers that we've sent to Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world have been injured in some way. So that's according to Forbes. And we have hundreds of thousands of traumatic brain injuries, and then we have post-traumatic stress disorder, and we have veterans who come. They have night terrors and all of these things. And, half to 2/3 of all the Americans killed and wounded were the victims of IED blasts. So why not utilize? They talk about intelligence. They're like totally like a bunch of buffoons. They're the biggest imbeciles on the planet. They're not intelligent. There's no intelligence with James Comey or Clapper. Or they're like stupid. John Brennan's claim to fame is that he spied on Dianne Feinstein, and he spied on the Senate. And then we find out that like Feinstein just the other day had like a spy from China that she had for the past 20 years.
I heard about that. Yeah.
And so like this. I mean, I'm obviously not saying that Julian Assange would, like compromise any value system. But I'm saying that there's obviously a lot of expertise that he has to make the United States safer while keeping his value system intact. And even while keeping the whatever value system the intelligence community has in the U.S. intact. I mean, there could be a symbiotic or some kind of relationship where both benefit. That's obviously, the case. Meanwhile, you have complete imbeciles like James Comey, who literally allowed a server in the basement. And then Louis Gohmert, who's a Texas congressman, he said that all of Clinton's emails, because this is the IG before Horowitz, this guy Charles McAuliffe, said that all her emails were siphoned off, and because they were hacked, they went to a foreign entity, not Russia, so one can assume China or another country. So all of her, and this was before retroactive classification, and she had emails that were born classified. And she had top secret and special access program intelligence. So, and just how she transferred that is also a crime. We don't even know how she transferred because Peter Strzok and all of them didn't ask. So this was in her basement. The whole world, the whole planet has, and then they're worried about publications of information that does not hurt the country. It actually helps the country from WikiLeaks. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that the revelation of some of that misconduct has been really important for us all, not just in terms of Hillary Clinton herself as a political figure, but again, going back to what we've been saying about the cultural change and the civilizational change that happens when you have all of this truthful evidence exposed. Because I am very, very sure that Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and some of the other figures around that drama, they are not the first generation of corrupt politicians. We have, and it definitely is in both sides. This is just the first time that we've really been able to see the goings on from the inside and not just from the sanitized outside. So that's really, really incredible. And I mean, if we want to talk about corruption around the DNC, there's also the Iran scandal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But all of that, I don't think that any of that would have been brought to the attention of the public if it hadn't been for what WikiLeaks did and the information that they were able to publish surrounding the DNC's emails. But
no, and I agree with you. And I will say this: this is not in any way like a partisan thing to say. There's a reliance on digital communication outside the U.S. government within the Democratic Party. There's an emphasis on that. They really emphasize using servers outside the U.S. government for a lot of this. The Awans, Clinton, Platte River, Dado, all of these So I just find it odd. And that could also be a reason why they don't like WikiLeaks.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I think that in some ways what it is a generational resistance to the facts of the internet. They want to kind of be able to put the genie back in the bottle and pretend that none of this ever happened and kind of go back to the way things were. And I think that part of the anger towards WikiLeaks is not even about WikiLeaks. It's the fact that the digital age has changed everything for intelligence agencies and all of the sort of apparatus around that. You know, the media that is influenced by the intelligence agencies and interacts with the politicians and all of that corruption. That one of Chris Blackburn, source for our stories at Disobedient Media on Joseph Mifsud, said it's the WikiLeaks, the wikization of society. It's the wikization of all of this political stuff. So they have to be able to figure out how to get their narratives back and not just have them instantly debunked by the information that is published, whether it's by WikiLeaks or, in general. So,
yeah. And I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of fear. And I think that also there's a great deal of deception, and they're very powerful people who want to hide a whole lot. And they view Julian Assange as a threat because he's an obvious threat to them hiding a whole lot of things. So this is why, look, I think that I'm not even going to get partisan. There are two types of people, or two types of voters in the country. I'm not even going to say what political party. There's a type of voter that if they knew that that their political person they're voting for or their party was utterly corrupt, they just wouldn't vote at all. Then there's the type of person who says that's just the way the game is played, and even if I hear how corrupt we are, well, the other side is just as corrupt, and in fact, because the other side didn't get exposed, that means it's a plot from Martians or Russia or whatever. So I just think that there's just two types of people. Like I said, I went from Bernie to Trump, and if I knew that Bernie was actually doing something horrible, I'd be like, what am I doing? This is bad. I can't vote for this guy.
It's interesting that you described that, because I was also I was an extremely enthusiastic Bernie supporter as well. And watching the corruption around that actually happen in real time before it was really known, like before we had the evidence, was so painful. And I was a Jill Stein voter after that. But what that's really shown me, that and Jared and Elizabeth Beck's efforts and your journalism and the journalism of others, has shown me that within the Democratic Party itself, it's not going to change. What can change is if, people like Tim Canova, people that go outside of the party and run third
like
party.
Tim Canova.
Run as an independent, then maybe you can make a change. But yeah, I think that without WikiLeaks, that realization, that kind of awakening process for so many people would never have happened. So I'll go ahead. If you have
go
a
ahead.
thought.
No.
I was going to ask you if you have any thoughts, as we get into our last sort of 5 to 10 minutes of speaking here, if there's anything that we haven't covered that you want to talk about as far as Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, whether it's what people should be doing, how they can help, whether, obviously joining the server, but anything at all that you'd like to discuss that we haven't yet.
I mean, I just want to commend Mrs. Christine Assange. I think she's absolutely wonderful and heroic, and she's definitely has already put an even more human face to all of this, because here you have this mother who is defending her son against the world. I mean, really against these powers. I don't see how they won't be victorious. I think that they will eventually be victorious. And I think that Julian Assange will be victorious. I just think he has too much momentum going for him. He has too many legal victories. And then it's the UK is, I think, I don't know what the government there is doing, because once if they arrest Julian Assange, they are now morally and legally responsible, which means they're going to have to defend the indefensible. So I don't see this. They'll initially claim some kind of victory, and people will, and again, don't want to be partisan, but there will be one side of the political divide jumping up and down and hollering at how wonderful. Meanwhile, the rest of humanity is going to be like, this is horrendous. But I just think that I think that he'll be victorious. I think Mrs. Christine Assange is wonderful. And at the end of the day, I don't see him. I only see him winning. And
I hope so. I hope you're right. And I think that, it's interesting too to note that when you flip it around, I mean, in the early days of WikiLeaks, it was one side, and now it's the other side that are for and against. But I think regardless, intelligence agencies and that unelected power structure have always been after WikiLeaks. Whatever side it is at the moment, there's still always that intelligence agency pressure and retaliation against them. So I think that's what they're up against. But I hope that your optimism is correct. I hope that that's what happens. And I know that the history books will definitely be on Julian Assange's side. The extent to which they're sanitized is up in the air, but
yeah.
He will definitely be a figure that is looked up to, for sure.
Absolutely.
No,
I agree 100%.
So thank you, HA, for joining us. And thank you for being patient with our late start. I really appreciate it. And
thank you, Elizabeth, for everything you do. Thank you.